I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Angela Wright. Angela is Head of Research and Education at Compassion in World Farming. She has a passion for improving the lives of animals, a passion that has driven her career from government scientist to lecturer in animal welfare science at the Royal Veterinary College at the University of London before joining Compassion in World Farming in 2014. Educated at Oxford, she is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine and the Higher Education Academy and holds a PhD in animal welfare in veterinary education. She retains an interest in pure education in her roles as external examiner for Portsmouth University and degree accreditation assessor for the Society of Biology. With her team at Compassion in World Farming, Angela is responsible for providing leadership and scientific support on areas as diverse as food sustainability, environmental issues, education and animal welfare on EU-wide projects, and also initiatives in China and the US. She also has practical experience in animal welfare and management in a broad range of species, specializing in pigs and sheep. Angela says, "I learned so much about sheep behavior and welfare from my small flock of Norfolk horn sheep, a rare breed from which more commercial Suffolk was derived, with the added benefit of helping to preserve this delightful breed." I'm glad to hear that. We'd like to ask Angela to join us now, and she's going to be speaking on animal welfare compromises throughout the supply chain. We welcome Angela Wright.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. As was mentioned in that introduction, I have sheep. They're going to feature in this presentation. So here they are at the start. And as we've said, I'm going to be talking more about animal welfare throughout the food chain. As we said in the introduction, Compassion in World Farming, we're a farm animal welfare charity. We operate on an international scale, and we were established 50 years ago, near enough, by a dairy farmer who was concerned about animal welfare in the post-war intensification of animal production. So you might ask, why have I got a slide with pictures of books about animal welfare in Islam? Well, Compassion is very proud of the fact that we've been working with the Islamic community about farm animal welfare for a number of years. So, for example, the book in the middle was written in 1988 with Mr. Masari. It has been recently updated. It's the book on the left there in 2007. It's gone out in a French edition this year. And Nadim Haq, who is Mr. Masari's grandson, is working on a revised edition at the moment. I do have a few copies here with me, so if anyone is interested, do come along and collect one. Okay, so that's the historical perspective of how Compassion has been working with the Islamic community. We're currently obviously engaged with Saqib, also Zina from the Halal Food Foundation, so we're working with outreach activities. Also, our food business side of the organisation is working on the bigger sort of halal slaughter issues with a round table group discussing ways forward. So we've got quite a history, and we're quite proud of that history. Okay. So, we're going to talk about animal welfare. This should be a video. Yes, here we go. So, I thought I'd start with a little bit about what we mean by animal welfare, because it means different things to different people. So, basically breaking it down into the most simplest form, animals that we keep that are dependent on us for everything in their lives, I feel that we owe them a good quality of life and a humane death. So we've heard from Steve about trying to make sure they have a humane death, but in this talk I'm going to discuss how we can give an animal good quality of life. I'd also like to bring in then, and I believe our next speaker, Rizvan, is going to talk about this as well, the concept of tayyab, so something being good, wholesome and pure, which is, again, another level of sort of observance of what is good on top of halal. And we have a quote here that talks about tayyab being explicitly mentioned in the Quran. So we think that there are a lot of the concept of animal welfare and the concept of TIAB really sit very well together. So we talk about giving an animal a good quality of life. What do we mean by that? Well, there are three key components. There's the mental well-being of the animal, there's the physical well-being of the animal, and there's it being able to exhibit natural behaviour. When you put all of those three together, you get a very sweet spot where the welfare of the animals can be seen to be very good. So, on to one of the core components. Animal welfare compromises throughout the food chain. As you can see here, across the top, I've got different stages of an animal's life. Talk about the parent generation and issues that might affect them, the offspring that are reared for food and the welfare compromises they experience, and then one thing that affects all farmed animals, welfare around transport and slaughter. Now, I'm not going to focus very much on that angle of things because slaughter is being covered elsewhere. And transport, even if you're vegetarian, all of the animals that produce the eggs or the milk will also have a transport to slaughter. So that affects all farmed animals. So starting with the broiler chicken, there are an awful lot of problems with broiler breeders. They're bred to grow incredibly quickly, so chicks grow to an adult weight by 6 weeks. That would be the equivalent of a 5-year-old being the size of a grown human. So that's a hell of a lot of accelerated growth. To get that level of growth, animals are sort of programmed genetically to want to feed a lot. So then if you want to keep those animals alive for longer than the 6 weeks, and you don't want them to put on too much weight and you don't want them to get too fat and be ill, you have to seriously restrict their food. So they go through their lives effectively being chronically hungry all the time, which isn't very good for their welfare. They don't have too many problems in the birth and hatching arena. We don't mutilate them. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the term mutilation. So if we trim the beak of a bird or if we dock the tail of a sheep, or we castrate an animal, we call that a mutilation. It's a technical term, not an emotive one, although it is emotive. So, from as I've described, their welfare is compromised by the high levels of growth that they have to undergo, and I'll be focusing on broilers a little bit more later in the talk, so I won't say too much at this point. Also, the housing is less than ideal in a commercial intensive setup. So their welfare is compromised there. Next, we've got laying hens. And again, as you can see where there are ticks, there are welfare issues. So we don't keep the male chicks from laying hens. So at the day of age, when they're first hatched, all of the male chicks go through, well, they're all killed. Quite often they're sort of minced, fully conscious, as a way of killing them. So we consider that is something of a welfare issue. Because we keep them when we keep them in intensive conditions, they get quite stressed and they attack other chickens. We cut the ends of their beaks off, which is a painful process and has implications for feeding as they go through life because their beaks can be sensitized. Laying hens produce so many eggs that they have all sorts of problems with calcium imbalances, and you can get a lot of deaths from when too much calcium is taken from the bloodstream. It can cause sudden death in hens, so you get quite a lot of deaths from that. A large proportion of hens, not so much in the UK, but certainly in Europe and worldwide, are kept in cages, and we consider that that is a compromise to animal welfare. Again, they have the same transport and slaughter issues. So we have rabbits here. There's not much rabbit consumed in the UK, but there's a lot in Europe and certainly a huge amount in China. They are kept the does are kept in singly housed in cages, have artificial insemination as a way of reproduction. Both of those things are not ideal. Again, the housing is an issue because it's all caged, and transport and slaughter again. Pigs, maybe not so relevant to this audience, but there are a number of issues surrounding the keeping of pigs. So there's extreme confinement in housing, and there are mutilations. So we tail dock, we teeth clip, we castrate. Still a lot of castration might be done without anaesthesia or analgesia. And a lot of sows are restrained in farrowing crates and gestation crates, so they spend a lot of their time unable to effectively do anything other than lie down or stand up. Fish. Fish is often the forgotten species, but again, there are quite a few welfare issues depending on how fish are farmed. Often when eggs are collected from the females, they're stripped out whilst the animal is still alive or stunned, and then that process kills them. Obviously, when they're sort of sea caged, they're kept in a confined environment. There's lots of disease. They can't display the behaviours that they would if they were, particularly with salmon, say, free living in the marine stage. And again, transport and slaughter. There are lots of issues similar, or a lot of stunning issues that haven't been overcome for slaughtering fish. And then finally, at the bottom, the dairy cow. She's slightly separated because I can't really fit her in the same categories, but there are a lot of welfare issues with dairy cows. A lot of them, they're bred to produce so much milk that their energy balance within their systems mean they're unable to reproduce. They have a shortened lifespan. Large numbers of cows are kept inside and never have an opportunity to go out. So that, again, there's all sorts of issues around those. So that's just a quick overview of some of the welfare issues that affect animals at different parts of the food chain. Now, I said I was going to focus on broiler chickens because I think they're a species that matters a lot. There's all sorts of issues with the stunning of them, and I think some of those might feed into some of the ways these animals are reared and the health conditions that they have. Now, there's a little symbol gone up in the middle of there saying end the cage age. This is our organisation's biggest campaign at the moment, and we're looking to try and get all of these animals out of cages as a way of improving welfare. And I shall come back to that a little bit later on. Okay, so when we consider the three components of quality of life, we have the concept of being able to live a natural life, to do the things that chickens do. And we might like to think that chickens are reared in this type of environment where they can explore, they can interact. Unfortunately, the reality is more like that, which is very difficult then for an animal to exhibit any kind of natural behaviour. So there's restricted behavioural expression, lots of things that chickens would like to do. They forage a large amount of their time. They have all sorts of maintenance behaviours like preening, stretching, wing flapping. And they also obviously can't access outdoors. So mental well-being, what matters to a chicken to make it mentally fulfilled? And in the background, if you're interested, these are red jungle fowl, so these are the progenitor species of the chickens that we have today. And these are housed at the University of Oxford, and they do all sorts of behavioural experiments with them. So as I've already talked about, there's feed restriction of broiler parents. So they can, however much they eat, they never feel full or satisfied. That's a major welfare issue. They can't really do much in that environment. They're sleep deprived a lot of the time because the longer a bird is awake, the more it will eat, the faster it will grow. So they're often kept in bright light for the majority of the day and only have a few short hours of darkness. Depopulation and transport is a very stressful experience. Obviously, slaughter is not going to be the nicest of experiences. But something that nobody really talks about, they lack maternal care. So these birds that we're talking about only ever reach the age of 6 weeks. So they're young birds. It's like a big creche for chickens. They don't have any sort of stabilising influence from adult birds. They never learn how to behave properly. Because these birds are being killed at 6 weeks, that's maybe not so much of an issue. But when you consider laying hens, we keep them alive for a long period of time. They've never learned how to behave properly. They've never had that moderating effect of an adult there. And that might well feed into all of the feather pecking and problems that we see in these populations. Okay, so then finally we come on to physical well-being. There are a lot of problems with the physical well-being of broiler birds if you think they are growing abnormally quickly, as I've mentioned, the same as a 5-year-old human growing to adult size. So I'm just going to talk through some of the issues that they have. As you can see from that picture, there's something wrong with that bird's legs. So a number of things that can affect broilers. Femoral bone degeneration, so that causes pain whilst walking, and when you get those birds in a sort of a big shed, they find it difficult to walk around, so they'll often spend a lot of time sitting down. They're described as lazy. What we're missing is the fact that they've actually got a painful problem going on, and we dismiss it as lazy. They do a strange kind of walking on their wings because it takes the weight off their legs. So if you see that, you know that bird is suffering pain. Angular deformities, so that's what we see in that picture there. And that has been shown to cause pain, which is not quite understandable. And then they get foot pad dermatitis, which is effectively burns on the soles of their feet because they spend all their time walking around on damp litter that's got ammonia. So they get burns on the bottom of their feet. Cardiovascular health. And this, I think, is particularly pertinent when we're talking about stunning birds and trying to keep them alive when we stun them. If a bird's got a heart problem, the chances are it's not going to respond in the same way as a healthy bird to that electrical current passing through it. So there are 3 main issues. Acute heart failure. So that's the same as us having a heart attack. The heart just gives up. That's painful. Broiler chickens also have a sort of a higher level of inherent cardiac arrhythmia, so the hearts don't beat steadily all the time. When you combine that with stress, you get quite a lot of death resulting from that. And we bandy around all these mortality statistics in a detached way, but really that animal has suffered before it's died. At least with acute heart failure, we perceive that to be acute pain for a short duration. So then there's chronic heart failure, congestive heart disease. And I suppose if we were to liken that to a human condition, it would be that your heart doesn't work properly and you'd need a pacemaker. It's that type. But obviously, if you don't get that sort of support, your heart then can't work properly. That causes all sorts of problems. Cardiac function will deteriorate over time. The heart becomes dilated, there's lots of fluid accumulates within the body, and some research shows that can be up to 30% of the flock might be experiencing subclinical levels of chronic heart failure. And then pericarditis, this is when there are lesions to the heart, usually through disease, and that will have a sort of restrictive effect on heart function, and obviously the birds aren't very healthy. Finally, large numbers of birds in intensive broiler production have Campylobacter. This is a reportable disease. It affects humans, causes food poisoning, causes death in humans. Up to 70% of the flocks might be infected with Campylobacter. There's been a lot of work done on that recently, and it's been in the media. So, when you consider broiler chickens, and you consider animal welfare, and you consider TIAB, are we eating healthy birds? Is this the kind of food that we want to be eating? Add to that, will it be influencing how reliable reversible stunning is? And it raises for me a huge number of issues. So how can we put this into some kind of framework that makes it easier for us to make decisions about animal welfare and what we consider to be acceptable? Well, certainly in the veterinary profession, it's considered under 3 categories: animal welfare science, ethics, and law. And obviously animal welfare science gives us a lot of information. Legislative positions can be drawn on that. But overarching all of those are the ethical perspectives and what we consider to be acceptable regarding animal welfare or not. And we can use that ethical perspective to influence any of the others. If I've got time, do I have 2 minutes? 2 minutes. I mentioned our End the Cage Age campaign, and I'd just like, if I can, to show you a little video just to get us thinking about the ethics of what used to be acceptable, what isn't acceptable anymore, and where we might like to take that. So hopefully if my able assistant can press the button. It should have sound, but it's only music, so it's fine. There we go, just something to end on and give us something to think about. Thank you very much.